In the Onter volume on memetics, Dan writes, for memetics to be a reasonable research program, it should be the case of copying differential success and causing the multiplication of choices overwhelmingly plays the major role in shaping or at least all or at least most of the contents of culture. Now that's setting the bar very high. I propose that we lower the bar a little bit. I'm going to leave overwhelmingly in there, that's just fine with me. Plays a major role in shaping or enabling all of the contents of culture. Now I think we're with a job description for memetics that it can admirably succeed in. Now, Sperber is a good Darwinian. Gee, I wonder how many slides are missing here. We'll find out as we go along. And a good Darwinian should attempt to honor Darwinism about Darwinism itself, to use a nice phrase from Glenn Adelson. And that means eschew essentialism at all costs. Now, the thinking tool that helps us do this is found in Peter Godfrey Smith's marvelous book, Darwinian Populations and Natural Selection, where he introduces what he calls a spatial tool, a thinking tool, to help us think about evolution in general more easily. And I'm going to try to explain it here. And of course, my pointer's batteries are dead. Does anybody? All right, I'll just do it the old-fashioned way. This is 3 dimensions of a multi-dimensional space, as we're used to using them. You can put any 3 dimensions you want on the X, Y, and Z axis, and then, oh, thank you. Oh, boy, the whole works. This is great. Thank you, Hugo. You're once again a lifesaver. And sure enough, hello. Yes. So this is one of Godfrey Smith's diagrams. Look at the 3 variables here. Fidelity of heredity, very important. It goes along this axis. If you don't have high fidelity heredity, then you get what is known as the error catastrophe. You can't have evolution occurring at all. High fidelity but not perfect is our paradigm. The paradigm is always up in the upper right-hand corner. The S dimension here is dependence of realized fitness differences on intrinsic properties. So that things that go to fixation from drift, of course, are 0 on that dimension. And our paradigm cases are cases where intrinsic properties matter a lot. Continuity, smoothness of fitness landscape on this dimension. So if we have an ultra-rugged landscape, it's very hard for evolution to work. So if we have a relatively smooth landscape where hill climbing of a sort works, then we get the paradigm case. Now, the mistake that people make is in assuming that if it ain't the paradigm case, it ain't evolution at all, it's not Darwinian. That's being an essentialist about Darwin, and you don't want to do that. This is one of the main messages of this book. Here's another one of his diagrams, just to see how else it can work. He puts 3 completely different dimensions on the cube. And what we understand, of course, is that the other dimensions, whatever they are, consider them clamped in some sort of normal or vanilla or fixed position, whatever you want to choose. And here we have the bottleneck dimension. So if there's a germ-soma distinction, so that the propagules are only some cells are going to be capable of replicating, then that's one dimension. Which is important, but not for everything. If reproductive specialization, the reproductive specialization is what he calls G here for some reason, I can't remember. The bottleneck is, nicely revealed when you think about buffalo herds. When they reproduce, it can be half the herd. The herd just splits in 2. There's no bottleneck there. And then, I can't even read what it says here. Overall integration, well, if you've got something like a slime mold that's intermediate, and again, if you have us, we're up in the upper right-hand corner. Well, the account of this thinking tool in his book is wonderful, and there's a brief discussion of it in the paper that's included in the ring binder for this conference by me. I don't agree with everything in the book, but I think that this is a particularly useful tool, and I've been using it myself. It's my favorite new thinking tool, but oddly enough, it doesn't make it. Oh, you see, there's another slide that's missing. Yes, okay. It doesn't make it into my forthcoming book, which is called Intuition Pumps and Other Tools for Thinking, simply because I would have had to go too far afield to explain how it works, and it would have taken a big chapter, so I reluctantly left it out. But here's a use that I'm making of the tool. I'll go very briefly over this since it's not relevant to culture. This is looking at at how we move from the abiotic world, the prebiotic world, to the world where we have genuine replication. And the dimensions that I choose for this are persistence reproduction, where in the abiotic world you don't have reproduction, but you have differential persistence of things. You have some phenomena, some cycles that are just more persistent than others, just as a matter of chemistry. And then you have energy capture and complexity, and when you get the right, you can see the prebiotic period as gravitating through this space up to the point where you have something like archaea or bacteria, and it sort of it makes the origins of life much less mysterious if you think about how this space has to be traversed in order to get to the paradigm cases where replication starts in earnest and it really takes off. But here's the use that is more relevant here. This is my diagram, where now I'm looking at culture on the top. You see we have cultural versus genetic. We have growth versus reproduction. We have internal complexity here. And so you'll see that the Roman Catholic Church has not had any offspring, but has grown bigger and bigger and bigger over the years, whereas the Hutterites and some Protestant communities, they have a lot of reproduction. They spawn lots of sects. But look at, trust is a cultural thing which is paradigmatically not Darwinian, but there it is. Words I'm going to be looking at very closely today. What you see, the aspen grove down here, is that reproduction or is it just growth? In some regards, aspen groves are single plants. They're all united underground, and that's really one very large plant. So there's, paradigmatic rabbits. That's not cultural evolution. I don't need to tell you that. Once you've got used to these diagrams, what you appreciate, excuse me a second, at least, let me get this working. What Darwin discovered is a genus of algorithms, of the phylum sorting algorithm, with many species. And the mark, but don't call it the essence, of these sorting algorithms that makes them Darwinian is that they lead to the production of otherwise improbable design. Compare these two artifacts. On the left, we see a termite castle. On the right, Gaudi's La Sagrada Familia. Very similar in appearance, and actually very similar in internal structure, too. They're quite remarkably similar. Although they look very similar, they are the products of two hugely different processes of design and production. We have mindless little termites on the one hand who don't know what they're doing. There's no boss termite. There's no architect termite. They just do their mindless, uncomprehending little thing, and this wonderful structure emerges. On the other, we have Gaudi, the sort of paradigmatic, intelligent designer with blueprints and manifestos and ordering everybody around. So we have top-down versus bottom-up design and construction in this case, yielding rather similar products. Now, there is a reason why the termite does what it does, but it's not the termite's reason. The termite doesn't have a reason for what it's doing. Gaudí, on the other hand, had reasons why he did what he did. Yesterday in the morning, we heard of Hugo Mercier's suggestion that reasoning is attending to reasons. Gaudí attended to reasons. That's reasoning. The termites don't attend to reasons at all. And yet there are reasons for the structures that they build. What I call free-floating rationales, a term which I now somewhat regret, although it's been many years I've been using it, because it strikes terror and disgust, nausea in many minds. I thought wrongly so. They expect that I'm making some weird mystical claim. Not at all. Trees do things for reasons. Fungi do things for reasons. Bacteria do things for reasons. The biotic world is saturated with reasons from the molecular scale on up. That's how we can reverse engineer it all. There's reasons why the parts are organized the way they are. There's reasons why these things behave as they do. The things are just the beneficiaries of those reasons. They're not the reasoners. Trees don't reason. They don't have to reason. They are designed to do things. The reason they do the things they're clueless about that, and that's just fine. My new motto about this is competence without comprehension. It is the fundamental, both Darwinian and, Thuringian? Turing had the same idea, and they're very, very closely related ideas that invert everything and understand that comprehension is not the source of competence. It is an effect of multiple competences piled on top of each other in interesting ways. We do things for reasons. We shrink, we shiver, we vomit, we blink for reasons that we don't have to know. Then there's the things we do for reasons where we have the reasons. Big difference. These free-floating rationales are, you might say, design features of living things. Well, and already I know that some people are going to be very design features. This isn't really design, it's only apparent design. That's what a lot of people want to say. Even my good friend Richard Dawkins, who proposes that we use the word designoid as a term for biological entities, meaning it's just apparent design. Well, I beg to differ. I have another use for the word designoid, apparent design. I say evolved design is real design. Apparent design just looks like design. Let me give you some examples so you can see the contrast. When cartoonists like Sidney Harris do blackboards covered with very impressive formulae, that's designoid. So, this. However, it's excellent pseudoscience. We're supposed to understand that this is very deep stuff on the blackboard, but it's just gobbledygook. Or how about this one? Whatever happened to elegant solutions? Now, that's designoid. The design in nature isn't apparent design, it's very real design. Because it really does stuff and it does it excellently. It is design without a designer. Now, some people want to say that's just contradictory. Yeah, like an atom that can be split. If we learned that atoms can be split, even in spite of the etymology which says they can't, we can get used to the idea of design without a designer in the sense of an intelligent designer. It is designed because you can reverse engineer it. Yes, this is adaptationism. And contrary to what some people tried to teach you for many years, adaptationism is alive and well and essential in evolutionary theory. The word why is ambiguous in English. There's two senses. There's the what for, the pourquoi sense, and then there's the how come, the comment se fait-il que sense. And the Darwinian algorithms, that whole class of them, what they do is not reduce what for to how come, although that's in a way, the direction of the process, from teleology to process history, but they do explain without residual mystery. We still need the teleological talk to characterize the phenomena, to look at the problems that are solved, to understand the excellence of the solutions, and to actually calculate how close to optimal the solutions are. We can't really get rid of the teleological side of it, and we don't need to, because we have an entirely naturalistic account of the process that explains why the teleological, or may I say intentional stance, works as well as it does. Now, Dan's alternative idea is the idea of cultural attractors. And I've been puzzling for years over this and just what I make of it. And I decided, and he may contradict me later and give a different and better explanation, that it's his way of trying not to be too much of an adaptationist and to find another way of characterizing the forces, the powers, the patterns, the dynamics of cultural change without getting into looking at the what for question of how these work. That might be what he's doing. But if that's what he's doing, I think it fails to explain all that needs explaining. We do have to ask what for. We have to ask, as I say, the cui bono question, who benefits, who or what benefits in all these cases. And the main reason we want to ask that question is because the answer is often surprising. The benefit does not accrue to, for instance, the individual human being or the genetic fitness of the human being. It accrues to something else entirely. Oh my, I did a much better version of these slides, and this was a much later slide, so now things are out of order. My apologies. Well, we'll just carry on. In that 2000 paper, Dan says, the simplest and most serious objection, that's what he calls it, and then this is my version of what it is that the copying of cultural items is in general too low fidelity to permit natural selection to get a purchase. You remember how high fidelity copying was one of the important dimensions, and the paradigm cases are way over to the right, and at the way over on the left you have error catastrophe, but there's a lot of room in between. There's a lot of room for variation in there where you still get, shall we call them quasi or hemi or semi or pseudo-Darwinian processes. I'd rather call them quasi-Darwinian. Okay. I am just astonished at these PowerPoints. I went through and removed all the bullets, and now here they are back. Okay. Daft. Well, how many of you would agree with this sentiment? Words don't exist. I thought not. So we all agree that words exist. Some philosophers, I know, but at least you're in the right frame of mind now. I want to talk about the cultural evolution of words. Tecumseh Fitch, in a paper in Nature looking at evolution of language, in a paper, a commentary called An Invisible Hand, he says that languages are neither natural nor artifacts made intentionally by individual humans. And I think that's wrong. They are natural. They're entirely natural. They're as natural as viruses. So do you believe in words? Well, let's think of what are words? They're not really physical things, not in any, you can't talk about what they're made of. It's like, they're like songs. What are songs made of? What are traditions made of? What are laws made of? Dogs are a kind of mammal, or they're a kind of pet. What are words a kind of? Kind of representation? Any other? Not really sound, although you can pronounce them. No, some of them are signs, some of them aren't. Representation is pretty good. I'm going to tell you what I think they're a kind of. They're a kind of meme. They're the kind of memes that can be pronounced. Then there's all the other memes that can't be pronounced. Memes, according to Dawkins, are items of culture that spread by being reproduced, sometimes with changes or mutations, and there's differential replication and extinction. Memes evolved just like animals and plants and viruses by natural selection. It's important to remember that viruses are paradigmatic examples of natural selection, and they're not alive. So you don't have to be alive to be created by natural selection. Words aren't alive. Oh, bother, I just think of all the slides that are missing here. Oh, well, carry on. I wonder if I've got it on. I'm really tempted to stop and see if I can find the other one, because it had some details that I thought of late at night that were much better. Begging your pardon, let me just see. Oh my goodness, yes, I've got entirely the wrong file open here. So I want to open.
Go to Open Research.
Yeah, Sperber 3. There we go. Now, I don't know how that happened, but now you see. Now here, first of all, you get to see what the organization of all this. Placing cultural evolution in a PGS space, design and reasons for designs. Words is means that's where we are right now. Okay. Oh yeah, there's the cover of my new book. Oh yeah, this is a slide I really wanted to go over. Here's a hard problem. Let's go back to this. Okay. How do we get from termite colony mines to Gaudi-type mines? Termite colonies do a lot of very clever things. They are sort of agencies. They are superorganisms, as E.O. Wilson would tell you. But you know, they don't write poetry, and they don't have laws, and there's lots of things they don't do. Now stop and think. What you've got between your ears, 200 billion mindless little neurons in there, that's like a termite colony. How do you get that termite colony between your ears to do what Gaudi does? How do you get a Gaudi-type mind? Minds that can have reasons and not just do things for reasons. There's the Mercier quote. Here's the solution. So I say this isn't the hard problem. There is no the hard problem. This is a hard problem, but I think it's soluble empirically. I can't give you all the details, but I even think I can sketch the solution. The solution is this. Our billions of neurons are put to work implementing virtual machines that are culturally transmitted. That's the punchline of today's talk. So now, on with it. Yeah. We've seen this. Yeah. Oh, yeah. The distribution of research and development in space and time. At one extreme, we could have what you might call fountains of genius, intelligent designers, clever kings and devious priests devising cultural items and systems with forethought. The other extreme, we have the termites, authorless, clueless, differential replication of designs with free-floating rationales. And in between, there's a lot of stuff. Semi-understood, semi-appreciated, and the claim is that culture depends on the stuff that evolved by authorless, clueless, differential replication, cultural replication. It depends on that, and on the intermediate levels, and that at the very top we have the intelligent designers, the Gaudis and Picassos and Darwins at the top. Yeah, we've been through this. We've been through that. And oh yeah, I focus on words because of what I deliberately call horizontal word transfer. There's much talk in evolutionary biology about horizontal gene transfer. It's a very important phenomenon. And it turns out that exactly the same phenomenon happens with languages, where we have words that jump from language to language. So words are more trackable items than whole languages if you want to think about them evolutionarily. You can think about a word like table and how it came from tabula and so forth, and it jumps from language to language. But you can see that it is what the ancestors of an individual word. This idea that words evolve is not a new idea. Here is a nice expression of it. A struggle for life is constantly going on among the words and grammatical features of each language. The better, the shorter, the easier forms are constantly gaining the upper hand. They owe their success to their inherent value. Who knows who said that?
Whitney.
Darwin, in The Descent of Man. Yep. Had that. So we all know that having a baby is a biological phenomenon, but writing a poem is also a biological phenomenon. Weaving a nest or building a house, these are biological phenomena. Spinning a web, writing a novel. These are all, in some important sense, biological phenomena. This is my favorite diagram of the Great Tree of Life, Len Eisenberg's diagram. What's particularly nice about it is you can see vividly at a glance this huge, everything colored, all of this, that's the result of the eukaryotic revolution which occurred there, the symbiotic, endosymbiotic origin of basically everything that, every living thing that's large enough to see with the naked eye. Made all of that possible. Now, the claim is that I'm making is right about here in the last, well, that's already several million years. In one species, we have had a similar explosive development, creating human minds out of animal brains. And the endosymbiotic trigger for that is the creation of language. Okay. Competence without comprehension, a bit more on that subject. Memes take advantage of information highways that were built by evolution for other species and enhanced in Homo sapiens. And this is parent-to-child social or communication. If you read Avital and Jablonka's lovely book, Animal Tradition, you learn about how many so-called instincts of animals are actually transmitted from the parents to the offspring during the offspring's early days. Food preferences, foraging strategies, bird song, and many other. And of course, the way you test this is cross-fostering. You take the eggs from one nest, you put them in an adoptive nest, and you exchange the eggs, and you see what song they sing. If they sing their genetic parents' song, then of course it's an instinct, it's innate. If they sing their adoptive parents' song, then it's something that is, they say, an animal tradition. And there's a lot of that. And the pathways from parent to offspring have been genetically enhanced. They've been optimized over the eons by evolution, by genetic evolution. And then once you've got the highway built, it's time for the parasites to come taking advantage of that highway. Think spam, think Twitter, think all the things that have recently parasitized the highway that was built for other purposes entirely. Boyd and Richardson make a good case for this in their book, Not by Genes Alone, about the second information highway. Once it's in place, it can be evaded by what they call oblique transmission, no longer from parent to offspring. And they have a name for those items that are transmitted obliquely. They call them rogue cultural variants. In other words, memes. By calling them rogue cultural variants, Boyd and Richardson suggest they are perhaps a negligible and irritating part of the operation of a wonderful system, but in fact, I'm claiming that, on the contrary, they take over. They become the dominant source of innovation, novelty, and indeed, they're what make our minds. The term meme, I'm not talking about memes now, I'm talking about the term meme, the word, is itself a rogue cultural variant. It enhances nobody's genetic fitness, as far as I know. May not even enhance science. Those who dislike the term are inclined to think so. It's just so darn popular. Here's Dan on the subject, Dan Sperber. Once the general idea of a meme is understood, especially if it's understood fairly loosely, it is all too easy to see human social life as teeming with memes. Darn it all, yes it is. It's very easy, and there's a danger of going overboard. And I suppose that many of you think, boy, is Dennett ever going overboard now? Well, just watch me go overboard. He goes on, if one were to define meme as does the Oxford English Dictionary as an element of culture that may be considered to be passed on by non-genetic means, then the claim that culture is made of memes would be a mere rewording of a most common idea. Anthropologists have always considered culture as that which is transmitted by a human group, in a human group by non-genetic means. Well, no. I think the anthropologists actually have missed the most important point. They didn't have the perspective of the meme's own fitness as independent fitness. The value, this is the value of mapping culture in a PGS space, is that you see a different way of finding and explaining patterns in cultural evolution. Derek Bickerton, no fan of memes, offered a challenge. Name just one thing that can be explained by memes that can't already be explained better by existing disciplines in the social sciences. Okay, I'll rise to the bait and give you an example. Functional patterns in society. Now, functional patterns, this is the functionalism of Durkheim et al., and it's very much out of favor. Let me give you a few examples. The function of music and dance is to improve group cohesion. Clothes fashions exist in order to permit class distinctions to be visible. Horrific initiation rituals are designed to turn young boys into reliable warriors. Religion is the opiate of the masses. And we could go on and on and on and on and on. All of these cases where interesting cultural phenomena are given functional roles, and one stays silent about, and how did this come to exist? Is it that clever priests did this, or very sly tribal chieftains put this all together? Who are the creators of all of this? Where did all this great function come from? And sometimes you get mystical answers about sort of the genius of the society and so forth. Put all of that aside, and what do you have? As I say, this is properly discredited, but the patterns haven't gone away, and they beg for explanation. And mimetic explanations have the potential to avoid the pitfalls of earlier functionalism, and, may I add, the pitfalls of group selection, which is a current pitfall which is attracting some very eminent people to pitch headlong into the mire. Yes, cooperation, all sorts of things can evolve culturally, and we don't need group selection to explain the evolution of groupish properties. Now, Dan would explain them in terms of cultural attractors, but I don't think that's a sufficient explanation. I want to know why these cultural attractors attract. And it's something about the very nature of the vectors and so forth. Yes, but what about it, and why these rather than others? I think we still have to play the adaptationist card and ask cui bono. So the view that I am pushing for culture is that it goes from clueless to genius, and in between there's every combination and degree of semi-insightful tinkering. One of my favorite examples is the Polynesian canoe. This is a paper by Rogers and Ehrlich that Peter Godfrey Smith drew my attention to. Here's what a philosopher, Alain, said about it in 1908. Every boat is copied from another boat. Let's reason as follows in the manner of Darwin. It's clear that a very badly made boat will end up at the bottom after one or two voyages and thus never be copied. One could then say with complete rigor that it is the sea herself who fashions the boats, choosing those which function and destroying the others. If it comes back, copy it. That's natural selection. Now, the individual boat builders, they may have theories about boat design. They don't need them. Just copy the ones that come back, and if you want to try out some variations, go ahead. If they're bad variations, the C will punish you for making them. If they're good variations, they may catch on. If you vary at random, you won't improve your boats as fast, maybe, as if you vary with some insight, but that is itself, there's no guarantees there. In all these cases, what we see are basically norms of correction. Information about canoes is stored in the brains of Polynesians, but it's also stored in their canoes. But only on the default presumption that the design is good, that this is a good canoe. Even if it isn't understood, all you need is the assumption or the presumption that it's good, so copy it, and then you're going to get the accumulation of design improvements over the ages. It's correction to the norm, a kind of digitization. Now, digitization doesn't mean zeros and ones. It doesn't mean binary. It means correction to norms. It is the key to the reliability of computers. It's the key to the reliability of DNA replication and transmission. And it's the key to the reliability of cultural transmission, too. Dan says this: the simplest and most serious objection is that the copying of cultural items is in general too low fidelity to permit natural selection to get a purchase. That's true of lots of things, but it's not true of my paradigm case. It's not true of words. Remember that words are memes that can be pronounced. By the way, I think Dawkins made a terrible mistake in ignoring words as examples of memes when he wrote The Selfish Gene. I think he was trying to be, he didn't want to be just sort of following in Darwin's footsteps in the descent of man, so he just didn't consider seriously the idea that words themselves are the single best example of memes, but I think they are. So, copying must be high fidelity, but not perfect. A lovely diagram originally done by Oliver Selfridge, my late friend. Read it, the cat. But now notice that the second symbol and this symbol, they're exactly the same shape. You automatically correct them without even noticing that you're doing it. That's correction to the norm. You use your copy editing in this sort of almost mindless way. But of course, if you don't know English, you're not going to do this. Now that's orthography. That's correction to the norm orthographically. And that's why we can read text where people have randomized all the vowels. It's really pretty easy to read text where the vowels have all been randomized, which helps to explain why people can read Arabic, for instance. But it's not just orthography, and in fact, orthography is not what really matters, because oral language is much more important as a foundation for cultural transmission than written language, which of course is a very, very recent outcropping. So I want to just demonstrate the digitization of language with a simple example. It calls for a little group participation. You ready? Listen carefully and then repeat after me. Mundify the epigastrium. Again? Again? Do you know what it means? No, you don't have to. Case number 2. You ready? And again? Can't do it. It was just as loud, there was just as much contour, and et cetera, et cetera. The thing was that you didn't have inbuilt correction to norms. You didn't have a finite alphabet of phonemes that would put it all together and make it understandable. That is the digitization of oral language. It is a brilliant feature, and no human being designed it. It evolved by cultural evolution. 5 minutes. Indeed. Okay. We're getting there. Memes is software, like Java applets yet. Memes are like software viruses. In fact, I'm going to say, no, they just are. They're software viruses. That's what memes are. But to understand this, you need to adjust your imagination about computation and software. Think about Java applets. You've got them on your laptop. They're largely invisible. You don't even know they're there. But without them, your iPhone or your interactions with the internet would be not anywhere near what they are now. And they depend, as you know, on the Java virtual machine, which is downloaded, usually transparently. You don't even know it's happening. It's downloaded to your laptop. And what it does is it provides a platform to run Java applets. And it doesn't matter whether the underlying hardware is a PC or whether you're running the Linux operating system or whether you're an Apple. It is platform neutral. And that means that people can write Java applets just in Java and they'll run wherever. And it's a brilliant idea. But it's not a new idea because that's what language did long ago. Words are virtual machines. Who designed them? Evolution. Genetic and cultural evolution. How are they installed? By repetition. Here's what happens. By the way, there's some lovely new data from Deb Roy about the Human Speechome Project with his son getting on this. So you hear a word about 6 times, and then you start using it. The first time you hear it, it's just a sound in a context. The second time you hear it, it's a familiar sound, sometimes in a somewhat familiar context. The third time, it's that sound again. Pretty soon you've got an auditory anchor in your brain, and now you can start repeating the sound in that context, and after usually less than 6 occurrences, it becomes a fledgling part of your vocabulary. And Deb has lovely data on what he, independently of any coaxing from me, calls word birth in the mind of a child. A sophisticated data structure gets tied to that auditory anchor. And as you know, children learn 2 or 3 words a day from birth to age 5. They also learn lots of other memes without auditory anchors. Remember, words are the memes that can be pronounced. Ray Jackendoff in Foundations of Language says that what a word is, or a lexical item is a semi-autonomous informational structure with multiple roles to play in cognition. I think that's about right. But look, what's he describing? He's describing an app. He's describing a semi-independent bit of software. They're like Java applets. You have the EVM, the English virtual machine, and the FVM. I have a very faulty FVM in my head. It's your FVM and your EVM that turn a termite colony brain into a Gaudi-type mind. Because once you've got that, you can download apps galore, methods, stories, sciences, everything. Just stuff it all in there because you've got the FVM or the EVM to run it on. Dan, in a paper more recently, writes this. Constructive processes systematically intrude on preservative processes. Cultural contents are not replicated by one set of inheritance mechanisms and selected by another disjoint set of environmental factors, not biological. I agree, but that's only an objection to a very simplistic view of memes. I'm saying that the life of memes within the brain is just as important as their life in transmission. You all know about typos. Some of you know about thinkos. It's a lovely term from software engineering. You say, oh, I'm afraid you made a thinko there. What's a thinko? It's a higher level mistake. It's not a typographical error. It's a semantic error. It's an error wherein you're misusing some semantic alphabet that you have. And wherever there's a best or right way of doing things and a wrong way of doing things, there's room for thinkos. Making a pot or a canoe. I'm almost finished. I'll be finished very quickly. Sewing a dress or cooking beans, performing a ritual. Other species have very rudimentary cultures they transmit. This has been lovingly documented by various animal ethologists and the like. But it never takes off. It never goes combinatorial. It's always very minimal. And the reason is that they don't have the digitizing discipline of language, which is the best thinking tool of all. And finally, memes as software. Human nature is the product of two semi-independent evolutionary processes, genetic evolution and cultural evolution. There's a lot of co-evolutionary interaction, of course. In other words, a human being is an ape with an infected brain, infected with thousands, actually more than thousands, hundreds of thousands of memes. You are your personal collection of memes, even more than your genes. Your genetic identity has been submerged in your cultural identity, in the language you speak, in the language you think in, and the ideas you would die for. All of that is who you are, and most of that is culturally installed in you in the course of growing up. My favorite picture of consciousness is also, of course, a wonderful picture of the memes that are charging through this guy's termite colony brain and flavoring and governing his life. You haven't explained consciousness until you've explained all of that variety and how it got there. For that, I'm saying you need memes. The book that I think, impressionistic as it is, still is the best account of how that happens, what it's like for memes to push neurons around, is Doug Hofstadter's most recent book, I Am a Strange Loop, which is full of insight on that score. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Dan. There's a lot of, I mean, I might want to answer you as much time as you took, but I won't use that. So just a few points. First, the suggestion that the kind of view that I've been pushing may come from my my objection to adaptationist. I find that offensive. Because now you don't, instead of attributing to me a reason which I would ponder and entertain, so it's as if I was a motivating force. I mean, you're doing the Marxist or psychoanalytic trick of suspicion of underlying motive.
I apologize.
Thank you. Apology accepted. I'm totally at ease with adaptationists. I fully agree with you on adaptation. I have no problem with that at all. My problem with the facts of the matter, I think the problem with the meme story is it misses crucial explanatory factors which you try to sneak in, because you're aware somewhat of the problem by having your correction factors. But that's not, in my view, the proper way to handle what is actually taking place on the ground. So first on the idea of attraction. Take you a very nice example of the cat, where the symbol for which we read as an H and the one which we read as an A are exactly the same. So one way to describe that is say, oh, there's some kind of self-correction mechanism. Let me describe it in terms of attraction. What happens is this symbol is halfway between two attractors, which is our mental knowledge of the letter A and the letter H. In one context, it's attracted by H, in the other, so that's how you get the interpretation. It's an example of the fact that whatever, we're not copiers, we're interpreters. We systematically interpret this. There's always this constructive part that takes that plays a role. You get it with this particular character. So that's just an illustration, nice illustration actually of what I mean by attraction. But you might say, oh, in this case, the attractors are themselves cultural objects, the letter H and the letter A, which you have culturally learned. But look, for instance, at the work of Stan Dehaan on writing. So what he shows is that, in fact, yes, a lot of different letter systems, alphabets have developed across the world, but they themselves have not any kind of shape of equal simplicity from a geometric point of view as the equal chance of actually being found in the letter system, because there are evolved factors of attraction in our perceptual abilities that makes that indeed the actual letter system will be attracted towards a certain specific shape for which we have a certain kind of ideas. These are causal factors that are really very important in explaining both stability and evolution of cultural systems, ideas, and so on, which you're not just going to get as a rule of correction. So how much do they weigh causally in explaining cultural evolution, or memes, if you want, and so on? Well, that's an empirical question. Yeah, sorry, please. Please.
I agree with everything you say.
Good.
But I would add that let's see how best to put it. Indeed, if you go down far enough, you're going to find attractors that are genetically evolved. But above that, we have layers and layers of culturally transmitted attractors, and the whole thing is, I think, you don't just want to talk about attractors, you want to talk about the fidelity that you get from having systems of attractors. I mean, I don't think there's really any conflict between your claims about attractors and my claims about digitalization.
Look, you say fidelity, but that's an hypothesis. What we do observe is enough stability for things to be cultural at all. Fidelity, you have to take a microscope and look at the process of transmission and see if you have a copying system actually at work. And you do often. And indeed, I'll come to words just in a second, where you have something pretty close to, yes, I know, closer. We have something pretty close to copying. What I want to say is the copying is just one limiting case of very little interpretation, and you're very close to it. But when you say fidelity, it's, what you observe is that at the population scale, you have stable cultural forms. You infer from it the fidelity. You didn't observe it. If you look, I mean, if you're a student of communication, if you're a student of all the process of transmission, if you're a student of memory, you don't see much fidelity. I mean, you see, there's a lot of fidelity, but it's way below what you would need to explain the stability. So what is the, so there's a gap between what you can explain in terms of fidelity of memory, communication, and so on, and the stability that you, and that's where attraction plays a role. Just one word about words, and then I will stop again, because it's fascinating what all the themes that you developed, and I would love to talk about them at much greater length. Take words. Indeed, they are the most memeish thing in culture. You're right, Dawkins should have used them. They're the best example that you can think of. But it's more complex. I mean, there'll be a lot to say about words. Actually, Nicolas Clédienne and I have used the example of attraction with words. But look at two aspects. So the phonology of words, that's where you get closest to something being memeish. Because indeed, there is something very close to copying. Of course, if you do the psychology of it, it's quite complex. There is construction too, there is interpretation too. But you're very clear. That's good enough in terms of fidelity. It's quite remarkable. What about the meaning of words? I mean, words there are two-faces bits here. Yeah. There's sound and there's meaning. But there's nothing to copy. You can't copy meaning. Meaning is not something that you can observe and copy. So you have to infer it in any case. I mean, how does a child learn a word? By inferring it. How do you, in speech, when we speak, we hardly ever use words to convey just their lexical meaning. So the starting point of an inferential process in any case. So their copying is not much of any form, a great candidate for explaining the stability, the relative, lesser stability of word meaning as compared to word sound. If you bring in factors of attraction, many of which are indeed or themselves already the result of cultural evolution, and by the way, it's not just cultural evolution plus evolved psychological mechanisms, ecological factors, absolutely, major factors of attraction. So, there certainly your memeish story for meaning doesn't go through that well. Just one last point. I've been thinking for forever actually about how to integrate, because I like the insight of memes is great. That's and since you're a philosopher and not an empirical scientist, and you see all the mileage you can get out of the insight of the idea of meme, you'd rather stick there and stay there, and rather than go into the complexity. I'm an empirical scientist, and so I've created a problem. But so how do we reconcile this great insight and the actual complexity of things? So actually, here's a simple solution. I suggest a new definition of meme. A meme is an attractor. That's what it is. It's a cultural attractor. But it will work throughout, and you have some among the cultural attractors which will rely on indeed single track of quasi-copying. It will be the most memeish of the memes, if you want. And you'll get your story going, but then you open the door to the actual empirical study of the complexity of the complex factors that are part of the picture.
That's a nice suggestion, Dan. I could go on and on, but I'll just make this one comment. it seems to me that after you've said just all that, I want to add, and once we've got this idea of attractors, we can start looking at which things attract and why, and the answer is not just going to be a process narrative. If we're going to do justice to the why, we're going to be asking a lot of for what questions, and that's where we're going to have an adaptationist account of why these patterns of attractors are there, and that's going to require us to take seriously what I think is the single best feature of the meme idea, and that is that it has its own fitness.
I
No?
almost agree with you.
Okay, we're getting closer and closer. That's great.
Let's take another 50 years and we'll be...
Okay, but I'm on if you are. Maybe that's it? No?
Just one very small question. What, to go back to your use of unattended reasons, there are reasons for which termites do what they do, but only the biologists attend to them, right? So,
Yeah.
so in what sense are these reasons just the kind of things that can be used for scientific reasoning by the biologists? I mean, what do you actually gain in postulating those reasons for which the termites, which can't attend to them, really do what they do? Because they are just, I mean,
Good.
beyond just the fact that these are the kind of things that the biologists can attend to, building theories and explaining what termites do.
Well, the only thing that I would want to add to what you just said is that this is not just an interesting sociological fact about biologists. Here's the way I would put my version of the point you just made. We are so far the only species on this planet that does things for reasons that we have. We are the first intelligent designers on the planet. We are the product of a lot of natural selection, both cultural and genetic, but we have this model of engineering, of making things, artistic things, scientific things, engineering things. Now, from that perspective that we alone have, we can look back at the history of life on this planet, and we can interpret it by reverse engineering all those forms. Now, when you reverse engineer the forms, you are always asking why, not just in the process narrative sense, but in the what for sense. You're asking the adaptationist question. Why are the parts organized this way rather than some other way? And again and again and again, what you discover is that nature's found something very devilishly clever in its own mindless way, that the competence has an explanation. We want to comprehend the competences, which we do using our reverse engineering. Now, it's true, nothing had to comprehend them to get this far. That's why I call these are free-floating rationales. Nature didn't represent them, the organisms didn't represent them, they weren't represented anywhere. I'll leave it at that.
Okay. I would like to go back to your diagram on Peter Godfrey-Smith's book, and this dimension, genes and culture. Okay.
Yep. You want me to go back to it?
Yeah.
Um,
If you can.
Um,
Yeah.
Easy way is to do it like this, I think. And then the next one will be the one we want.
The other way. Yes. Cultural versus genetic. As I understand Godfrey-Smith, these dimensions are supposed to be continuous. You have a continuous variation along these dimensions.
In most cases, but they can be binary
Okay.
too.
But my question actually is, Godfrey-Smith's book is about transitions in individuality.
Yeah.
Okay, And I think when he comes to Cultural Revolution, he doesn't speak anymore of transitions and individuality. Something that. So I don't see how you put your ideas on a transitions and individuality framework. Okay. Do you see language or memes as the beginning of a kind of transition individuality of what kinds of individuals you can think about on these lines? Okay.
Well, yeah, Peter Godfrey Smith doesn't push his own thinking tool in the directions that I'm pulling it. But that doesn't mean it doesn't work. I think it does. And I sort of say more about why in my piece about Godfrey Smith, which is reprinted in the sort of program. I think that it's fascinating to see just how many of the points that PGS makes, especially one of them I didn't have time to talk about. One of the most interesting points he makes in his diagrams is what he calls de-Darwinization, where he talks about how phenomena that are clearly ancestral to phenomena today, in the process of one transformation or another, become de-Darwinized. They move down the scale. One of the obvious examples is, say, neural growth. Every neuron in your brain is a direct descendant of free-swimming prokaryotic cells that fended for themselves on their own for 1 billion years. Those were really paradigm cases of Darwinian phenomena. They are no longer in that game. They have been subjected, imprisoned. They are now captured inside craniums, and they're no longer fully Darwinian, but they're partly Darwinian. There's been a de-Darwinization in that trajectory. And the same thing happens, I think, in culture. And that's a topic that takes some real development, though.
Is it possible to say something non-Darwinian about culture in this context?
Oh, sure.
Because there seems to be an asymmetry between the natural selection and the cultural selection, natural evolution and cultural evolution. In the natural evolution, you have a random generation of variation and then tight constraints on the selection, because the environment puts very huge constraints that you pass or fail the test. In cultural evolution, the opposite seems to be the case. So you have a lot of constraints on variation. You want to write the next Gothic novel or whatever, you have to conform to a number of constraints. And then the selection, well, maybe there are constraints in the selection, but it could also be random in some cases, because your manuscript was read by the right person, and then it got some success. So do we really have to be, what are the facts here that we need to explain, and what's the best explanation for the facts? Maybe simply there is no reason to postulate any Darwinian mechanisms for cultural evolution.
Well, I have a long answer to your question. It's it was my APA presidential address of about 12 years ago. It's called In Darwin's Wake, Where Am I? And the idea there was to look at the process of writing a play, for instance, and how do we give a sort of a post-Darwinian, a Darwinian explanation of authorship of something like a play. And I discussed that in some length. I can't go over that now, but it's on the website, and you can readily see what my answer to that is. A couple of quick points about the relationship between Darwinian and non-Darwinian phenomena in the world of culture. One of the most obvious facts about human culture is that we can see across the valleys to, as it were, adaptive peaks. We can represent, as it were, the fitness landscape of our own ideas. And so we can see things that we want to get to, and we're not myopic in the way that genetic evolution is myopic, although we have our own varieties of myopia. And I love to quote a piece that Leonard Bernstein wrote many years ago, just before he wrote West Side Story, in fact. It's an article he wrote called, "Why Don't You Run Upstairs and Write a Nice Gershwin Tune?" And Bernstein, magnificently trained, genius composer, musician, was aching to write a popular tune that would make him rich. And Gershwin could do it. That musical imbecile, Irving Berlin, could do it. Why couldn't he do it? And he tried and tried and tried, and the piece ends wistfully by saying, "I just wish that someday I would walk down the street and hear somebody whistling one of my tunes." Well, he got his wish in spades a few years later with West Side Story, but it nicely shows how even in cultural evolution, the genius of the generator is only one factor, and it's not decisive. In the same way that the sea selects which boats get copied, the culture selects which songs get hummed.
Well, maybe it's time to thank Dan.